And thank you for coming to this very important talk on fixing the broken incentives in the American welfare system. I think we're going to start off by sort of setting the stage. Since President Johnson launched his war on poverty back in 1965, we have spent trillions of dollars on trying to alleviate poverty in the United States, yet poverty persists. Certainly, we have made some gains, but it seems that we have diminishing marginal returns. So this panel is basically setting up to talk about how we can improve this system so we can move people back from on the welfare dole to work. And so I turn it over now to my colleague Michael Tanner to talk a little bit about how he approaches the situation and what his work has been doing recently.
Yeah, I think to put this in a little bit of context, we should recognize that we actually have a much more generous welfare state than I think most people commonly believe. There are more than 130 federal programs that deal with poverty. About 80 of these provide benefits directly to individuals, the others to low-income communities or groups. And we spend about $1.1 trillion every year at the federal level on these programs, and another $700-800 billion or so at the state level. So we're spending close to $2 trillion a year now, about close to $40 trillion since the start of the war on poverty. And what do we get in exchange for this money? Well, actually more than commonly believed. In terms of material poverty, we've actually done a pretty good job of reducing it. There are, we're not the South Sudan. There are very few people in America starving to death. We actually do a pretty good job at relieving material poverty, but we do a much less successful job in terms of enabling people to escape poverty, enabling people to sort of rise as far as their talents will take them and become masters of their own destiny. A good way to look at this was when we had the expanded child tax credit. Everybody said, well, the poverty rate went down, and then we got rid of the expanded child tax credit, and the poverty rate went right back to where it was before. Well, I would argue that those people were poor all the time. We simply hid it by giving them some money. What we really need to do is be looking at how we can get people out of poverty altogether. And I think we're going to discuss that a little bit on the panel here. But my argument is not just simply to shovel more money at the problem. It's how we need to deal with some of the incentives in the system and how to deal with some of the problems that exist outside of the system that sort of block people from getting ahead. That's just a lot of what FREOPP is up to these days.
Thank you. I'm Buzz Brockway with the Georgia Center for Opportunity, a state-based think tank conveniently located in Georgia. We've done a lot of work on this really since starting in about the year 2016, and one of our research director, Eric Randolph, has built a computational model that attempts to describe what Michael was pointing out. What are the practical impacts of these programs on folks who use them? And what we found really is there are pretty significant cliffs, which I think we'll talk about. There seems to be bipartisan agreement these days that those cliffs exist and the cliffs are bad. But really, what I hope that y'all get out of this panel is, to me, the moral, the injustice that people are doing what we want them to do. The typical welfare recipient in the state of Georgia is a single mom with a couple of kids who works. She's doing what we as conservatives all want her to do. She is trying to get out there, and these programs trap her in lower wage jobs. We have met people who turn down promotions and raises because they very quickly do the mental math and say, I can't afford that. You're going to pay me an extra 25, 50 cents an hour, but I'm going to lose hundreds or thousands of dollars in overall income because of what Michael was talking about, the overpayment in these programs. So we need to fix the system for her. And I hope that's what y'all get out of this panel. So thank you.
Austin Harris, state representative from Southern Iowa. Thank you for being here today. So I'm just finishing up my first term in the Iowa House of Representatives. And the first year that I was there, the Iowa House and the Senate and the governor took action on some fairly major welfare reform in the state of Iowa. There's a lot of competing interests, especially when it comes to making reforms to the SNAP program. And there's a political landscape that's a little difficult to traverse. As Buzz was saying, oftentimes the political debate forms around, well, you're picking on the single mom with two kids who's working. And that's a pretty hard fight to pick, obviously, politically. But that's not what we want to do. We want to make sure that when we have welfare, that there are folks who who fall in hard times, who need that to get back on their feet. But with old safety nets have holes in them, and sometimes people get trapped in that. There's some steps on the ladder that are missing. So when we talk about welfare reform, we have to make sure that we're giving people the opportunity that when they do fall down on hard times, we're able to lift them back up and get them to a point where they're being able to be self-independent made folks. And so I think that's something that often we miss in this discussion. We want to be compassionate about it, but we also want to make sure that that folks are able to get back up on their feet.
Thank you guys so much. So coming back to Mike, can you explain? We've kind of talked around the welfare cliffs. Can you talk exactly what they are and what it looks like for a typical mother of two?
Sure. What we're talking about when we talk about welfare cliffs is the idea that you go on welfare and you receive benefits which are relatively generous to begin with. And then somewhere along the way, we start to phase out those benefits. And that's natural. Unless you're going to give those benefits to people forever, there's going to be a phase out in some way. What happens, though, is that as you earn more money, the phase out in many cases begins to overtake the amount of money you're earning, so that you end up with a situation where you can earn a few dollars more and lose, as you mentioned, hundreds or even thousands of dollars of benefits. There's actually, I believe in Missouri, it was a case with child care where if you earned $1 more, you lost $19,000 in benefits, which is certainly not an incentive to go to work. And so what we need to do is find a way to adjust that phase out in a way that provides a better transition to get people into work. It's not just a discouragement to work, it's also a discouragement to marriage. If you have two singles parents living in a house and they're separate, that's one thing. As soon as they marry, the second spouse's income gets counted and the benefits go away. It's also an invitation to fraud. We want to, people keep their money off the books because they don't want to lose their benefits. So we already know that people in general who are on welfare spend about $1.50 in spending for every dollar that they say they earn in income. So we don't want to encourage that anymore as well, people moving into the gray market or the underground economies. We want to encourage people to do better by taking that job, that raise, that promotion, getting more education by going into a better job, and the welfare cliffs discourage that.
So some of the panels I was on that I saw yesterday, there seems to be a disconnect between DC policy folks like us and state legislators like y'all. And so it's just like, what is it that DC policy people don't understand about what the challenges y'all are facing when you're dealing with either constituencies or you're dealing with your colleagues in your representative bodies? What are like the challenges we might not know about, and what are the kind of successes you guys have had?
Yeah, I think in the conversations we've had, and I'll mention briefly, during Trump 1.0, we were able to work with some of his appointees. They're one of the myriad of agencies in HHS. They were cooking up a plan to try to address this, try to give some permission to states, some pilot projects to states, to give them the flexibility to encourage people back into work and create a system that could smooth out the cliffs on a pilot project. And I think, the disconnect, I think, is kind of more with the elected folks, if I could say it that way, and the folks on the ground in the states that deal with this. Because they think, well, we've created these programs. They address certain needs, and they have the people in the program can do the things that need to be done. They can extend them. They can, give them extra benefits. They can, give them, all these sorts of things but on the practical level is people are making a decision to, and oftentimes to turn down a raise, to stay out of work, to work fewer hours, all those sorts of things. They never really sit down. They don't sit down with the person at the SNAP agency and say, let me map out a plan. And so I think that's the big problem. The practical, I get, maybe to quote Yogi Berra, there's a difference between theory and in practice, but in practice there isn't. So that's kind of where the disconnect is. On the ground, people are not sitting there thinking, I need to go talk and map out a plan for my life with the welfare person in the welfare agency. They're thinking, what do I do to get by this week, this month, this year? And that leads them to decisions that disincentivize work, and as Michael pointed out, disincentivize marriage and these sorts of things. So I think that's the big disconnect between Washington and what's happening on the ground.
Yeah, I think Buzz hit the nail on the head. Take it from a different perspective. I don't know if it's necessarily DC policy experts that have a disconnect with the states, but maybe federal bureaucrats that have a disconnect with the state. So in 2017, I was a part of the post-transition team at the USDA and the Food, Nutrition, and Consumer Services Agency. And for any of those out there who may not know a whole lot about that agency, essentially SNAP is their major program that they run along with the school lunch program. But SNAP takes up a vast majority of that agency's budget. Part of the work that me and my coworkers in that post-transition team were tasked with were going into these agencies, sub-agencies, and talking with the administrators of the program to learn where there were certain areas that we can make reforms to. And sitting down and talking with the administrator of the SNAP program, who I think was acting administrator at the time, very competent person, obviously, I think, was doing her job to the best of her ability. But we asked the question, how do you measure success in the program? And after a long meandering answer, I said, no offense, ma'am, but if I could summarize what you just told me, essentially you measure success based off how many people are enrolled in the program. And that's the disconnect. When I think we have to look at how we do measure the success in the program, and we want people to get help when they need it, but we also want people to get to the point where they don't need that help anymore, and we're able to move them off the program, and they're able to fully contribute to our society and our economy. So I think that's the disconnect, and we have to have a conversation at the federal level, but also at the state level. How do we measure success on these programs? And obviously, we want to make sure that people get the help that they need if they need it, but also that they don't have to stay on the program and they don't have to return to the program down the road.
If I could just add one thing, Michael pointed out the tremendous amount of money that has been spent over the years, and it has had, as Michael pointed out, has had a positive effect. People are brought above a subsistence level. But I think what we really want, and what's missing in all of this, is we want people to live a life of flourishing. We want people to flourish. And they're not going to flourish if they are dependent for a long period of time on these sorts of government programs. They're not going to get that value of work and that tremendous feeling that you get when you're given a raise and a promotion and all those sorts of things. And so I think that's the kind of things that we need to be focusing on. How do we create a situation where people can flourish?
Yeah, exactly. And you talk about the satisfaction people feel when they get that raise or that promotion. One of the problems with welfare cliffs is they discourage people from doing that. That people tell us that they turned down a promotion. They didn't go on to school. They turned down a chance to work extra hours because they knew they'd be worse off in the end if they did that. And we also see that from business groups. If you talk to the chamber and stuff that have gone out, and we've surveyed them, and they talk about the fact that they have employees who have said, I can't work any more hours because I'll lose my housing. I can't take that promotion and become an assistant manager because I'll lose my child care. That I'll lose SNAP if I go on and get get a different degree and then get a promotion on that. I'll lose my SNAP while I'm doing that. So we actually are discouraging people from taking those things that actually lead to a more flourishing, to a better life, one where they have more self-satisfaction and self-actualization. We're discouraging that with the way the system works today.
So, we free market types, and people who are pro-federalism always like to think of the states as laboratories of democracy. And so what states are experimenting with addressing the welfare cliff, or the specific examples, if not, holistically doing the welfare cliff, because obviously legislation takes time. But what are the opportunities and the who's leading the way right now, and what does that look like?
Well, in our work at the Georgia Center for Opportunity, we have come in contact with a lot of folks, a lot of states. As I mentioned, this computational model we've built, it's about 13 states right now. Our goal is to get it to all 50, so that people can look, actually, legislators, policymakers can look specifically at their county, what's happening in their county, what are the effects of the cliffs. We've had a number of conversations. There's some great stuff going on in Utah right now. Actually, down the street at AEI, folks with Utah and our folks with Georgia Center for Opportunity are having a day-long discussion on this very topic. So it's exciting that we're taking over DC talking about welfare cliffs, and it's exciting because it's really important. It affects a lot of people's lives, but there are dozens of states who are looking at this now, and we've testified to legislative committees in Kentucky and working with folks in Arkansas and South Carolina and a number of other states, West Virginia, who they're starting to grapple with this and starting to try to figure out what can we do. Instead of just waiting for Washington to do something to fix the problem, what can we do on the state level to really dig in and try to make these things happen? And we can elaborate more on that. I'd love the other panelists' thoughts too. But in some of the programs, there are some flexibilities. Child care, for example, is mostly a block grant. States can renegotiate, and part of that negotiation can be get rid of the cliffs and increase competition in child care. There's waiver opportunities and things like SNAP and Medicaid and other things. And so, let's figure out ways that to unleash those laboratories of democracy by using some of the flexibility there, and that will continue to put pressure on Washington to ultimately fix these, which is where it has to happen. And I don't want to monopolize too much, but just very quickly, I mentioned that Trump 1.0, we're working on a pilot project that would allow states to do this sort of thing, and I'm hopeful that now that work has been done. I had the opportunity to talk with some of the folks, kind of the career people in the Office of Family Assistance where this originated. They still have that plan, and they're anxious to actually act on it. COVID kind of blocked it before, but hopefully now Trump 2.0, we can kind of pick up where we left off and offer this to states who are willing to try it out.
Yeah, I think there's some state experiments out there that are clearly worth looking at. I think Missouri, their plan isn't necessarily the best designed, and they've had a lot of implementation problems with it. The bureaucracy really pushed back hard on trying to block it. So we haven't seen it implemented in some results, but it's got a good look at the idea that we need some sort of transitional or smoothing of the benefits, particularly in child care, which was a big problem there, but also SNAP, TANF, and some of the other programs as well. Tennessee has a pilot program called Our Chance Tennessee, which has been very effective so far, at least anecdotally. I know we're waiting for final data. The Federal Reserve of Atlanta is looking into the results, so we hope to see some final studies and data out of that. That's good. Utah, with their sort of one-stop shopping, I think is a very interesting model that they haven't really addressed the cliff per se, but it provides a framework within the system in which they can address the cliffs, and we think that that'll be good. Some other states have not done so much. A lot of states have simply said, well, we'll just raise the benefit level. Yeah. But super high benefits are some of the problems to start, some of the reasons you start with the problem. Others have said we'll simply raise eligibility so we can bring in more middle class people into the system. That's not the goal we want to do, is get the middle class on welfare. The idea is to get low income people off of welfare. So it's how we can deal with that.
If I could just pick up on something Michael said, talking about Utah. It was a great paper by Mason Bishop at AEI a couple of years, maybe 2 years ago, about what he called the Utah model. And I think this is a key point as states approach this, is looking at what Utah did, which put work and welfare under the same roof. Work has to be at the center of this, because that's the only way, as Representative was pointing out, we want people to be on that path to earning their way out of these programs, and that's only through a job can that happen. So I think that Utah model, what we've been calling one door model, it has to be at the center of that, and states can do it in all sorts of different ways, but having work at the center of our welfare delivery, I think, is crucially important.
Yeah, I think to add something on that, I think we also have to talk about prevention, people who fall into poverty. And a lot of this is generational. I'm from Appanoose County, Iowa. It's one of the poorest counties in the state of Iowa. Not that long ago, it was on the front page of the Des Moines Register, the poorest county in Iowa. And it was my home county, which always makes you feel good. But I grew up with a lot of folks who grew up in poverty, who grew up with a home life where the parents were part of generational poverty, they were on welfare, and there wasn't a figure in the household that showed them or instilled in them the pride and quality of having a work ethic. And so we've, for several generations, not just in Iowa, but across the country, have instilled in young people's minds that if you want to be successful in life, you have to go get a 4-year college degree at a Regent University or a private university. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But oftentimes we send people to get a 4-year college degree, and they have no idea really what they want to do. They get a degree that's not really opening up any doors of opportunity for them. And by the way, we put them $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in debt. But what we should be telling folks is if you want a 4-year college degree, that's great. There is a market demand for that, no doubt. But you can also have a great, meaningful life and make a boatload of money being a welder, working on the assembly line. And so in Iowa, we've turned to apprenticeship programs. We incentivize private businesses to go into the schools early. For example, in Pella and Knoxville, Iowa, which is in Marion County, just outside of Des Moines, there's Vermeer Manufacturing and I think the Weiler Company. Very successful manufacturing businesses. They have internship programs at the local public schools and private schools where they come in for an apprenticeship program during the summer. They get a skill set, and it's completely free. They make a little bit of money, but as soon as these kids graduate from the school system, they go right into the workforce and are contributing back into the economy. Some of those folks may have already ended up there. Some might have went down a different career path. Some of those folks may have fell into the same traps that their parents did. So I think we have to, when we talk about ending the incentives in the welfare program, the best welfare program is a good paying job. And if we can get folks into that quicker at an early age, the better off we'll be.
Yeah, this is an area for real opportunity for bipartisan reform here. We've seen a number of governors from both parties, for example, eliminate college degree requirements for most state jobs, which is a terrific approach. There's no reason why you have to have a 4-year degree for every job that this state provides. And we've seen Josh Shapiro and folks on the Republican side as well take this approach. So I think that's a really good start.
So yesterday we heard that one of the things that was driving, that brought a new, or at least a growing portion of the Republican voting drive is in the Rio Grande Valley, and people being resentful of people on welfare, like basically people who are getting benefits that they didn't earn. What sort of political challenges have you faced trying to get either your reforms through, or what successes have you had in like trying to make it palatable to a voting base that is like historically, resented? I think welfare has been one of these sort of the culture war issues within the United States.
I think we need to recognize that poverty is not a moral failing. People are not poor because they're bad people. Poverty often stems from things that are outside of people's control. It often stems from bad decisions. I think you have to look at both of those. Certainly you want to encourage people and provide the incentives for people to make good decisions in terms of getting a job, getting an education, things of that nature. But we also need to recognize there are circumstances outside their control that in terms of the way the economy is changing, and that poor education, the need for criminal justice reform, zoning laws that block housing, inexpensive housing, all of those sorts of things enter into it. So we need to be looking at those things that we can change, and then we need to find incentives for people to make better choices in their own lives. All of those sorts of things are part of this.
Yeah, I was really interested when Patrick Feeney mentioned that and his experience down in that area. I think it's certainly true that there are abuses. Any time you have a large pile of money, there's going to wind up in the wrong hands sometimes. But I think, as I mentioned before, by and large, if we focus on fixing the system for the people, as I mentioned, like the single mother with a couple of kids who does have a job, if we focus on fixing it for her, then a lot of these other issues that stem from that will be fixed. You will audit the program and determine who's not eligible so that we can direct the money back to the people who are. But I also think that part of what we've lost in America is that that importance of work and the dignity of work, even jobs that that some of us would never want to do. There's still dignity in that, and I think Mike Rowe back with the Dirty Jobs show kind of helped start to change that perception out there. But that work has tremendous value, and I think to me that's kind of what those folks were telling Patrick Ruffini, that they look around, they see that work has been devalued. It's still very important to them and culturally, and probably with a little bit of religious implications in there too. That it's important to their faith. That work is good in and of itself, and so I think that's part of what we have to do here is restore that understanding that work is valuable. All work should be rewarded, and if we change the system so it stops punishing work, then I think a lot of those perceptions will and actualities will go away.
There's also an important generational aspect to that. We know there's numerous studies out there that show the fact that if the parents work, the children are more likely to work, and so on. The attitude is often passed down. So to the degree that our current system discourages work now, it's going to discourage work in the future. And so again, we come back to the welfare cliffs and the need to address them as an important reform.
To that point, my boss, Randy Hicks, has adopted a number of children. He adopted one young lady. And then I guess it took place on the weekend, and so Monday morning gets up to go to work, and she goes, "Where's Dad?" "Oh, he went to work." Tuesday morning, "Where's Dad?" "He went to work again." And so it was, this because she had not seen that in her reality, right? She had never seen that people get up and they go to work 5-6 days a week, and they do it over and over and over again, And so, part of it is a cultural problem and what people have experienced in their lives. So.
All right. With that, I think we can open it up to questions from the audience. Just raise your hand and we'll send a mic to you.
Thank you very much. Adam Millsap, Stand Together Trust. I have a question for probably Michael and Buzz. Maybe you can best answer this question. I'm totally sympathetic to this idea that we need to do something better on phasing out the benefits cliffs. What I haven't seen, and maybe you guys are aware of, is anyone come up with an actual plan that would actually take like a sample state and say, this is how you could phase these out better, and this is how much it would cost, and the reason why having a more gradual slope would help people escape poverty easier. Because I get all this idea, but I haven't seen the nuts and bolts and the dollars and the actual phase-out schedules anywhere that's like, let's try this. Is that level of detail exist anywhere?
Well, I think actually I'll let Buzz do this in a minute because I think they've actually done a lot more of this. But partly the problem is there's so many programs. When you're dealing with 80 some odd different programs, all of which have different phase-out ranges and different work requirements and different, it's very hard to put this together on a comprehensive basis. But essentially there are 4 pressure points at which legislatures can make an impact. Essentially there's the initial benefit, how high or how low that is. If that's too high, it makes it very hard to do the phase out later on. So you've got to look at how high your initial level of benefits are. The second is how long you go before you start a phase out. If you go too far, then the phase out has to become very steep and very quick, and you kind of drop off. The third is what is the slope of that phase out? Essentially, are you phasing out quickly? There are some programs that essentially, like childcare, particularly where it's essentially straight down. Or are you doing something that's a more gradual slope? And then finally, at what point are you finally ending benefits altogether? So you're eventually going to play with each of those 4 sort of pressure points, and that's going to determine how far and how fast you go. And that's going to vary by program and by state, I think, to some degree.
Yeah, I think Michael hit the key points, the 4 very important aspects of it. Is there a grand study that says it will cost to fix this, it will cost us X dollars? No. A lot of it is all these programs on the federal level and at the state level too are kind of in silos. And so it's very difficult to determine what mix, the average person, what programs are they participating in or not participating in? What savings could be realized if we, encouraged work and people were on that path to get out of it. So I think what the approach that we're taking at Georgia Center for Opportunity is kind of going program by program. What are the big programs? We know healthcare, Medicaid is a huge program, millions of people in it. In Georgia, it's roughly 1.4 million. SNAP in Georgia is roughly the same number. We assume there's a lot of crossover there of people who are on both of those programs. But go program by program. What is the key? What are the handful of things that you can do that would fix the cliffs in that program? The first paper that my colleague Eric Randolph has produced was on SNAP. He's got 6 recommendations. Most of them are at the federal level, but a couple of them can be done at the state level. And he's working now on one for Medicaid and child care. So we're kind of taking it program by program. What are the core problems in the program? How would you go about fixing them? And I think what you can do is put together a menu of programs that the average person probably is taking advantage of. I mean, healthcare programs, food programs, childcare programs, maybe housing. You can kind of put together a menu there and say, all right, if we fix these, we've really moved the needle quite a bit on this issue. I will mention, as I mentioned before, we talked a little bit about Utah and what they've done. We, through our work with some of our colleagues in a group we're calling the Alliance for Opportunity, there's a little section of the WIOA reauthorization that is working its way through Congress right now that would allow small states with with low workforce participation rates to start to have permission to look at what Utah has done and see how can we make this work in our state. It actually has, we've got Bernie Sanders supporting a bill that was introduced by Representative Virginia Foxx. So there's that bipartisan agreement on it. There is hope and a chance that it could be signed here before the end of the year, and then we can get that started across a handful of states that would be eligible to participate in that. So I think I guess the way we approach it, we've got to get people to take that first step. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. This is an enormous elephant. So we need states to take that first step.
And I'm sympathetic to all this. I'm just going to make one more challenge, I think, to the group, any researchers in the room. I think that's fine, but my worry is that we talk about how complicated this is. We talk about all the interactions of these programs, and then we go to the part-time legislator and say, you guys really need to look into this and come up with some kind of plan. And then they say, well, what's your plan? And our plan is like, well, there's these pressure points, and you can change them all, and there's a 50 million options. You guys will figure it out. They won't figure it out. I think my problem is we need to see, the researchers need to really sit down, take a sample state, take a sample set of programs and say, hey, here's a thing you could do to align these incentives of these programs. Here's how much it would cost. I'm not saying it's going to be the answer. I'm just worried that if we don't come to the table with something and we just put all the pressure on this part-time legislator in Iowa or Virginia or wherever else and say, figure it out, we're going to be having the same conference 10 years from now.
That's a fair point. And as a former part-time legislator, I don't get paid enough money, and I know Representative Harris doesn't get paid enough money to figure this all out. But I think we've got to start somewhere, and I think taking that first step, and that's why we kind of think at GCO, doing what Utah did and putting work at the center of this is the good first step, and then hopefully other reforms follow that. But fair point. It didn't get here overnight, as Michael pointed out. Many of these were created back in the 70s, and here we are 50 years later, and they're as bad as ever. So,
the only positive I'll give you is that the idea of welfare cliffs has come into popular parlance now. This was not something 5 years ago that anybody was talking about. So we've brought in a lot. Your work's done a lot of it on the Atlanta Fed's done some great stuff. Pitch FREOPP's work, the AI, a couple of other. It's now something that is being discussed, and that will ultimately lead to more detailed plans. I think down the road. Give us a couple of years to put this together. We're still new at it.
Thank you for being here. I'm curious whether it will take some kind of event to bring this to national discussion to get some kind of federal legislation moving, or whether this will it'll be one of these bills that no one pays attention to that sort of smooths out these welfare cliffs. If something major needs to happen, and if something major needs to happen, is there a risk that bringing it into the national discourse will actually, you'll get some amendments that actually expand these programs and create new problems that are unforeseen? So how do you contain the problem and make sure maybe there's a technocratic way where you can just go through the administrative state and you don't need to, you can just make some rulemaking changes and you don't need new legislation at all. So what is the most strategic way to approach it?
Well, my thought on it, on that is that if you look back at maybe the last time that the Congress undertook major reform of welfare programs was back in the Clinton era, the TANF, what became TANF, and that came about because states were allowed to experiment. Pressure started to mount on Congress to actually do something, and that's what kind of forced it onto the national stage. I think a dramatic event. I don't know that welfare, people going on and off, when the economy is worse, more people sign up for programs. It's hard to, how can you reform it then? When the economy is good, there's no incentive to reform it. This is kind of what been the cycle, because who's on these programs? No, we don't need to reform it now. So it's kind of independent, I think, of what's going on in the economy or what kind of shocks might come. So, but I think a couple of things I think that Washington could do. Some of the requirements of the programs are when there's a economic downturn, they waive some of the requirements. And they do things like they did during COVID. With SNAP, they just said, well, everybody gets the maximum benefit. Well, that's costing enormous amounts of money and exacerbates the cliff problem. So if Congress in its wisdom decides that that's what needs to happen, well, as soon as you can stop it, stop it. And as soon as you can get back to normal and put, many of the programs have work requirements. They're waived during a recession. Well, as soon as the recession's over, get the work requirements back on, get the program back to normal. That doesn't happen, and that's a political problem, but that would help a lot.
Yeah, in terms of a national event to take place to kind of put it at the forefront, I don't foresee that over any time in the near future. Maybe perhaps President Trump can appoint Matt Gaetz to be in charge of this reform. Maybe that would cause up a controversy. Who knows? But that was a joke. But even in no comment. But I think. In Iowa, it was hard for us to pass welfare reform last year. We didn't necessarily do anything on the cliffs that Michael and Buzz have talked about, but we put in some eligibility requirements and toughened that up. Even that was hard. We tried to go even further by getting back to the basics of what SNAP was originally intended for, which was for people to use SNAP to buy grocery ingredients to cook their own healthy meals, not use it to buy frozen pizzas and Mountain Dew and whatnot. And you would think that'd be politically easy. And I think for the most part, the voters are for that. But you have all these special interest groups where their companies rely on a large number of people with SNAP benefits to buy those type of products. And so essentially you're taking their customer away from them. Well, you would think maybe in Iowa that wouldn't be a huge issue. But a lot of these products use a byproduct that's made out of corn. Corn is obviously a very important industry in the state of Iowa. So that got pulled out of the bill. And so it's tricky. And I think, I believe in federalism. I believe that the states are laboratories of democracy. I think, let's for right now take an approach state by state. And when the opportunity may arise, which who knows when that will be, let's do some major reforms on the federal level. But I think right now this is a place for the states to act and lead on this issue.
Hi, thank you for being here. Michael Schwartz from the Ronald Reagan Institute. And I apologize if I'm doubling up on the previous question, some things that have just been said, but the broken incentive that I see is not with the welfare recipients, but it's with and I say this with all due respect to any elected officials on the panel, but with the elected officials. The incentive for them is to basically keep welfare spending very high because the constituency for welfare recipients is much higher than the constituency of 15 that care that welfare spending is too high. So I suppose the question is, are there, especially with the federal welfare budget, which is humongous, as we have a generally ballooning budget and deficit, are there anything at all that there's a political will to cut over the next in this next Congress to really try to get some of this welfare spending under control.
Yeah, I mean, there is an issue in terms of the far left and the far right, I would say, on welfare reform. On the left, we just need more benefits. You talk to the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, they talk a little bit, well, there's a cliff. What we really need is higher initial benefits for the really low income. And you talk on the right, and there's a lot of, well, it's welfare queens. We need to get they're being bad people and lazy, and we need to kick them off type of thing. But I do think there's a sort of a broad middle constituency that's growing for the idea that what we could do is make some reforms to the system that'll make it more efficient and better. The other thing that I'd be interested in hearing other people's thoughts on is I think one of the problems was that we came out of the original welfare reform with cash benefits declining and what's called in-kind benefits or payments to providers increasing. And that created huge constituencies among the providers. Landlords love Section 8 because they get paid for it. Doctors are all for more Medicaid spending. You find that all these other groups that want more money and they have much more powerful lobbies than do poor people, which are not the most powerful lobby in Washington by any stretch of the imagination. So I think moving back to more of a cash-based system would be a good step in the right direction, and consolidating some of these programs. When you have 80 some odd programs, every one of them has a champion in Congress who thinks, my subcommittee oversees this special program for poverty. It is the most important program in the world. It can never be cut by a dime, type of thing. So I think consolidation and moving to cash would both be steps in the right direction on this.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the political pressure continues to mount. I think, as Patrick Ruffini talked about yesterday, and we've seen this with President Trump, he's assembling kind of a working class. The Republicans have become more a working class party, and why is that? Patrick's the expert on that, but part of it, I think, is that, in his own way, President Trump articulates, hey, I am for growing the economy. I am for giving you opportunity. And what's happened? People have responded to that. A couple of years ago, AEI, with their community study, showed that where people thought the section of American society that most believed in the American dream, in that phrase, are the people making less money. And why is that? They still believe it's there. They still believe it's possible. They still want to achieve it. And so I think that political pressure can come in the form of elections. People who talk about hope and opportunity and progress and freedom winning more elections than people who talk about, I'm just going to give you a handout and keep you comfortable without allowing you to live a life that flourishes. So maybe that's kind of the long-term project, but I think that, I hope that can happen. I think that can start to happen, and that will say, wait a minute, that will draw people's attention. Now, as Michael pointed out, we're in a couple years now of serious people really starting to think about this and figure out ways to address it. Hopefully the combination of those sorts of things and saying, all right, Republicans have built this coalition of working class people. How do we adopt policies that help them? Well, this is a big one. This is one that can really help. And so I would encourage the incoming administration, the incoming Congress, to really take a look at this, because this is going to help the people who just put you there.
Yeah, we're talking particularly about people between 100 and 300% of the poverty line are the most affected by welfare cliffs. I'm willing to bet you that a large portion of them voted for Trump.
Got time for one last question, very quick.
Well, you mentioned Bernie Sanders and Virginia Fox, and I just wonder what role a livable wage plays in all of these considerations, because like in North Carolina it's around $7. You can work 2 full-time jobs, $7. You can't support a family, so you're going to rely on benefits, and that's it's just factual. So like, how does that, obviously a $15 an hour minimum wage feels a little bit out of the free market space, but just interested to see how that all.
Yeah, I will say sort of the economics of the minimum wage has gotten a little murkier in recent years. There's a question of whether the minimum wage is kept up with productivity gains and so on, and where it should play out through the market. It's also, we know that raising the minimum wage helps some people and hurts other people, and it's sort of a balance. People are going to lose their jobs if you have too high a minimum wage, but other people are going to get raises and stuff like that. So it's a little bit murky in terms of literature. I think what we really need to do is create more economic growth so that wages rise naturally. I mean, when we see, we have more jobs than we have people, wages tend to go up. We saw that coming out of COVID. There's been an increase in wages. So we need to deal with that. The second part of that is you do need to be able to encourage people to improve their own condition. We know that most people who start on minimum wage don't stay there. Almost everybody who gets a minimum wage job actually gets a raise within the first year. And we want to encourage that to keep going up. The problem what we're talking about with the welfare cliff is people get that raise above minimum wage and they say, oh, wait a minute, I'm going to be worse off overall because I'm going to lose the benefits. We need to deal with that problem as well in this.
And I'll just add very quickly, in our computational model, in the state of Georgia, the wage where the cliffs really come into play for people is around $13, $12.50, $13 an hour. That's well above the minimum wage, but it's in the range of you're from the South, Waffle House. You work at Waffle House, that's about what you're making, and it puts you right on the edge of that cliff. So the $15 minimum wage, unfortunately, just going to shove a lot of people over the cliff. So Michael's approach is much more better. Economic growth, let things flow naturally and address these cliffs.
Please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists for this great discussion. Thank you so much.